Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. Proposal 1 will be on your doorstep May 5th. It's up to you to decide whether we're going to raise the sales tax from 6% to 7% to fix our roads. Here to talk about that today are Kyle Malin from the Capital News Service Mears, Mickey Hurton, Associate Publisher of City Pulse, Scott Hagerstrom, who represents Coalition Against Higher Taxes and Special Interest Deals, and former State Senator Gretchen Whitmer, who helped make this deal as the minority leader of the Senate last year. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Kyle, do the political thing. How's Proposal 1 doing?
Well, it's not doing well, I can tell you that. Any poll that has been out there shows this losing after people have read the ballot language about 2-1. That's not where you want to be if you are supportive of this. This is really asking voters to be legislators.
So it has the faint aroma right now of death.
It does, but it's possible. There could still be a Hail Mary shot that this thing could pass, and if people who are going to vote no decide they don't want to go to the polls, if there's a big late media push that's extremely convincing. The problem is that it's so hard to condense the message and what this is into even a 60-second spot. It's really hard to see the voters really getting their heads around this, unless they all want to read the City Pulse coverage that we did online and get all brushed up on this.
Hopefully they will.
Yeah, right.
But you wrote that coverage, but you said you could have written twice as much. Is that complicated?
Yeah, I mean, I could have gone a lot deeper into this, but we've got word limitation. That's part of the problem. I think that's most of the problem here. That everything that had to go into this to make this political deal happen is too much for the public to swallow.
Gretchen, does that compute with you?
Well, I'm not a part of the campaign, but I did make a couple phone calls in preparation for today, and I think that there is some sentiment that the public is starting to really dig in and get educated on this, and that they're feeling pretty good about where things have headed. I think it's been a tough start. Certainly I was disappointed that there was so much change in the beginning, and it seemed like it took a long time for the governor and for the campaign to figure out what their message was and to get organized, and they changed the whole team up very early on. But as someone who voted for this and someone who was in the room trying to negotiate this, I'll tell you, I understand the sentiment that people are irritated that the legislature didn't fix the problem themselves. We should have. I cast many votes toward that end. But at the in lame duck, that was not to be had. The Republicans would not move forward with that in the House. And so this was the best we could come up with. And I think it's really a good plan. Not passing this really, I think, would be a huge mistake, because this is an opportunity that we have to do something meaningful for our infrastructure in the state, which has been decades-long problem in the making because no one's made this a priority, to shore up education funding and to move forward. A no vote, I think, kicks it back to the legislature, who is as inept as many think it was last term. I don't think they've gotten any better in terms of problem solving, and I think this is our chance to do the right thing.
And it would also restore the full 20% for the earned income tax credit. Mickey, you disagree with Gretchen. Why is that?
Well, I think we're being held hostage by an inept legislature. And I don't know how this gets better, honest to God. I mean, the roads have been awful for decades. The legislature has refused to act on this. And at some point, we need a competent legislature. We need a legislature that will reflect the real needs of the state. And if we just enable this, it gets no better. In fact, this rewards the incompetence of legislators who refuse to provide tax money for the roads that we need. They get to go back to their constituents and say, well, I didn't vote for taxes, vote for me. How does it ever get better? The next thing, what are they going to do for higher education? If you want your universities funded, you're going to have to put it on the ballot and you're going to have to vote for it yourself. This is not the way our system is supposed to work. We need a good legislature, and this just enables the incompetence.
Can I just jump in real quick? Because I understand the frustration, and I share the frustration. I'm not excited about casting this vote, but I also know while we desperately need better leadership in Lansing, I don't think we're going to get that as a result of a no vote here, and I'm very worried about a number of things. I loved when Stephen Henderson wrote in one of his articles, I've never been so mad at someone else that I punched myself in the face. And that's what he said about this vote. Casting a no vote here hurts the electorate, and I think that's was a really salient and kind of humorous way to put it, but I think it's real.
But how's it going to get better? How is it going to change?
Well, okay, Scott, your thoughts?
Well, you know, this is if this passes, this will be the largest tax increase in nearly 50 years. There are a lot of families out there still hurting. This is a very regressive plan. It hurts those at the bottom of the economic ladder the most. And you know, total state spending has gone up greater than the rate of inflation, whether you look 40, 20, 10, or 5 years back. You know, this is even larger than the temporary income tax increase Blanchard passed in '83, and it's larger than the temporarily passed tax increase from Granholm in 2007.
But the numbers say that those at the bottom of the ladder are going to do better because of the earned income tax credit restoration.
Well, you know, the earned income tax credit, that's basically welfare by another name. It's
Well,
a
regardless,
it
aren't
uses
you
the tax
wrong?
code.
Aren't you wrong that it's going to hurt the people at the bottom of the ladder more?
I think Coleman Young Jr., who voted against this plan, said very succinctly, he voted against this because the earned income tax credit doesn't make up for the harm that the increase in the sales tax does to his constituents.
Okay, so your political persuasion is part of the reason that this happened, that conservatives would only go for it through this deal, and yet you're walking away from it.
Well, no, I'm not walking away from it. You know, they have the money. We have one of the highest taxes on gas in the country. The legislature, over the past, as was just said, over the past several decades, has made the choice not to invest in roads. Are you really balancing the budget if you're not funding priorities?
But what are the priorities that aren't going to be funded if this passes?
Well, simply if you just freeze spending at the rate of inflation and take the excess and dedicate it to priorities like roads, if they would have done that a few years ago, this wouldn't be a problem.
Well,
and you
now
look at the budget plan.
But the only priorities aren't roads.
Well, roads, if our lives are at risk, I think they are a priority. You know, the governor.
No one is saying
we're
they're not a
spending
priority.
$3.7 billion. We're spending $3.7 billion this year in the Department of Transportation, and we have over $500 million in the rainy day fund. The governor proposes putting another $95 million in that fund in 2016, bringing it to $614 million. But at the same time, he proposes cutting the Michigan Department of Transportation budget. That is either their rhetoric and their actions are not matching up. You know, if we can buy a new Senate office building, $70 million, will cost $134 million with interest. They're looking at a new visitor center, $88 million. If we can, you know, I like it when Ben Affleck's in my town in East Lansing and filming, and that's sort of cool. But, you know, families and businesses make choices every day. And if we can subsidize Hollywood film studios, you know, let's stop that. Let's force the legislature. I agree. We shouldn't encourage this bad behavior. And it's proposals like this that the public is very suspect of what the legislature is doing. And I think Rich Studley, the head of the chamber, he said last November, December, he said, you know, we may have to look at going to the ballot and just getting this done ourselves. And I think there are groups that are looking at doing that.
So, but you're quoting Rich Studley, so I guess it begs the question, does that mean that you endorse the gas tax that was passed in the Senate last lame duck? Because that was what he was pushing, and so was the chamber. Because I think a lot of business people understand our roads and our infrastructure has a direct impact on our ability to conduct business.
That was a far better proposal than this. When you have a $1.2 billion plan and a plan that's zero, only in Lansing in politics do you come out in a compromise is a $2 billion tax increase.
Well, that's nice to hear. That was a proposal that I was part of crafting, so that's good to.
Well, thank you.
Good to know.
I
but
think
isn't that
I
part of the-
personally believe they can do it without tax increases.
This could
but
be
I-
a cuts-only solution, really.
I personally believe that, but I think the public would be very open if this was just about roads. You know, I think in the end,
You mean
if they
to
would
pay more, be willing to increase their own taxes?
Well, I
if it
think
were
first
just
we
about
need to
roads?
look at efficiently and effectively spending the funds that we have now. There are 3 audit reports that just came out that are very critical of the department. The Detroit Free Press did a great expose on January 4th, front page, about premature failing of concrete. We have Wallet Hub that just came out with a study showing that we are 45th on return on investment for the taxes that we pay and the services we get back as Michigan residents. And then we need to look at cuts. It's an insult to Michigan residents. We couldn't find one dime of cuts to try to help fix the roads. Instead, we're paying a 58% surcharge to Lansing Special Interest to get our roads fixed. And then, once you do those 2 things, let's look at tax increases, but only for roads. I think the public would be very open if this was just about roads and it was a user-type fee.
But isn't the 1% just about roads?
Well,
Actually, none of the 1% would even
Well,
go.
doesn't it free up money elsewhere?
So essentially,
that
the
1%
sales
goes
tax
to
that is collected
roads?
at the pump goes
Yes.
directly to the roads,
Right.
and that is the most, that's the biggest change. But in order to shore up schools, which are not a public or a special interest, in order to shore up public safety for our locals, which is not a special interest, we needed to find revenue elsewhere. And if the Tea Party or what your group thinks that we should take $1.2 billion out of education, there's not a single person in Lansing that agrees with that, and that's why we are at this junction.
No one's, there's Main Street and reality versus political talk. The Bolger plan, for example, education would have still seen an increase in funding, just not as much as what they wanted. If you make $50,000 one year, and next year you expect to make 55, but make 53, you don't go around screaming, "You cut my budget." There's a real difference between Main Street and political talk, and I think that's why the residents of Michigan are very suspect, and I think that's why the polling is showing that this is going to go down, as long as they get out and vote.
Kyle, is Gretchen right that nobody in Lansing believes the money should come out of education? Or some people think that's exactly what this is about, that the Republicans voted for this knowing it would fail, and then they'll be able to say, hey, we got to fix the roads, it's got to come from somewhere. Education is a big pot of money.
Well, if you take a look at what Snyder did when he first took office with the whole business tax shift, there was money that basically came out of the school aid fund to balance the budget. I mean, she's right in that regard, because what you had to do is you had to cover expenses how you could, and so they said, well, the school aid fund, that can fund higher education now. They can fund a greater chunk of it. And if you're squeezing the budget more, then you look at those kind of gimmicks to balance the budget. And I would suspect there would be more of that. Yes.
See, I think that's important for people to see that. I think they need to see that the legislature in some ways has no regard for education versus its own, perpetuating its own position. And we have to see them make these hard and horrible cuts. When they make them, that's when I believe even zealots are going to go, well, I can't have more revenue cut from my local government. I can't have my schools diminished. I mean, at some point, they have to see the legislature for what it really is. And until that happens, that's back to my point to you. So how is it going to change unless we recognize the crisis, the governing crisis, and as a people decide we have to do something about it?
The real crisis is in the households around the state that have seen their real income drop over the past 10 or 15 years. For some reason, government believes it needs to be exempt and constantly receive increases in revenue that are up and above the rate of inflation. This is real harmful.
I disagree with that. People need help too, and that's let them eat cake philosophy.
That's not let them eat cake.
Sure, it is.
Let people
we
that
need a
work for the
government
money
that
keep
we need
more
a
of their
government
money.
that works
their
for people.
Their incomes are dropping because we're not competitive with other states. We're competing with 9 states
Well, then
that
they
have no
need
income
help,
tax.
don't they? They
They need
help.
jobs. They need private sector jobs.
That's
they need
fine,
to bring
but
more
they need
private.
help till they get
400,000
the
new
jobs.
in the past 4 years.
Right, because of the auto industry primarily.
Which was bailed out.
Right.
Kyle?
Well, to Mickey's point there about budgets being cut, I mean, I guess I've sat through a lot of budget hearings, and I've seen budgets, particularly during the Granholm years and when the auto industry took a dive, I saw a lot of deep cuts in budgets. You know, the schools took cuts. Municipalities claim that they've been underfunded $6 billion since 2001. They've already taken cuts. So there have been a lot of cuts, and I quite frankly, I don't see how you can get any deeper than what we had in 2010.
And I guess I would agree with you in terms of people really are struggling. But the fact of the matter is, we have got to invest in our infrastructure. We are so far below the constitutional revenue limit, and that's because business is not paying their fair share. And I would argue that we all have an investment that needs to be made, and this governor has continued to choose to put taxes on the back of the people and give business a free pass. And I think that's one way that we could make this up, but that's not what's before us. The question is, are we going to pay 1 penny in sales tax to shore up the school aid fund and to make the investment in structure, in infrastructure that we need to, and to give people relief who are struggling the most with the earned income tax credit?
Gretchen raises a very good point with investing. This proposal, if passed, it is 1 penny more, but over the course of a year, residents will pay 16.7% more in sales tax. They'll pay a dime more at the pump for a gallon of gasoline. They'll pay increased registration taxes every year. And because of poor drafting, they'll send an extra $100 million in federal taxes to Washington, D.C. So
They will get that fixed, though, Scott. They have pledged they will fix that problem.
Yeah.
I'm just saying what they're.
And if you can't trust the legislature, who can you trust?
So, but you talk about investing. You're taking all this money out of people's home, out of their families, out of their family budget, out of small businesses' budget. So that's less money for them to invest in their family, in their small business, in their community, and instead give it to Lansing.
But sometimes doesn't the state have to invest in the bigger picture stuff?
Yeah, well, you talk about the cuts, but when you look at the big picture, state spending, total state spending has gone up greater than the rate of inflation, whether you look back 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years.
Well, that's a product of the federal government, Scott, right?
But it's still total state spending.
Thanks to the
Total
federal
state
government.
spending, right. It's actually.
Thanks to the taxpayers of this country and of
How
this
about the
state.
general fund? How would you characterize how the general fund is looked?
That's a false argument, because every time they pass a tax increase, they statutorily dedicate that to a certain thing. And they say, well, we can't touch that. We can't touch that because it's restricted. We can't touch this because it's constitutionally restricted. Yeah, but you can pass a constitutional amendment and ask every single family in the state to cut their budget.
It's interesting. You've said a couple times the political speak and trying to question whether or not we're being accurate with our words. But I thought it was really interesting that the very first commercial that Paul Mitchell came out with had people in a grocery store, when we all know for a fact that groceries don't get taxed. Right. You don't pay sales tax on your groceries. So I don't know that you've got moral high ground in terms of being accurate with
I think most
the
people
language.
shop either at Meijer or Walmart, and I believe half the goods they sell are non-groceries and taxable.
Kroger might disagree with that. And
Mickey, is it your contention that what needs to change is we need more moderate Republicans, or do you blame Democrats for this as well?
Well, I probably need more moderate Republicans, just the way the districts are gerrymandered. But look, you've got term limits, which distort the process. You've got redistricting, which is it also distorts the process because everything happens from the right of center, and you also have people. We get the government we deserve, and this is on us. This is who we've picked. But at some point, I'm just saying that we need to get much smarter and more engaged in government that takes our state forward, and it has to happen. And it's sad because it's going to get worse.
I do hear from a lot of people who agree with you, but they're from here in Lansing, a more progressive, more liberal community. Scott, how is this going to play out among more conservative voters on the west side of the state? Are they going to reject this and say, now we got to kick the bums out? Or are they going to say, we're rejecting this and we're sorry that the bums voted for it in the first place, but we're not going to elect more liberal politicians? Isn't that how it's going to play out?
Yeah, you know, it's hard to say. The elected officials here in Lansing have raised this to such a level of emergency. You know, after all, our lives are at stake. So I think it's incumbent on them to come up with a solution. Senator Shirkey, who on one hand led right to work, but on the other hand led the Medicaid expansion, said, I voted to put this on the ballot. I'm going to vote for it. But I'm very confident if it goes down on May 5th, that on May 6th, we will come up with a solution. And I think you see in the House a willingness to look at places to find revenue to dedicate to roads. The House voted to cut the movie tax credit, to eliminate it, and they just voted to cut a corporate welfare program that will produce tens of millions of dollars, free that up for other purposes like roads.
Kyle, you live and breathe politics. Do you think there's a chance that what Mickey wants to happen could happen?
In regards to more moderate Republicans?
Yes.
You know what? Every district is different, and even though there are some moderate Republicans that were, ousted because of term limits, we did get some new moderate Republicans because of this. But that's not where the prevailing winds seem to be going. It does seem like the people that are elected to represent people both in Washington and at the state level have gotten more conservative on the Republican side. That seems to be where the popularity has gone. Just in general, the legislature has gotten more conservative in Lansing and not less conservative. The people who are in charge of the House right now, for example, are the same people who voted no on Medicaid expansion, for example, who voted no on the roads deal. These are people who, just in general, represent a more conservative ideology. But, it's like the pendulum on a clock. It will swing back eventually, I'm sure.
People have to decide, do they want Michigan to be more like Alabama or Kansas? Because that's the direction we're going,
No, I think
do we want to live in those states? And that's what that's what our legislature says, yeah, let's do it.
I think it's a little different. Do we want to look more like New York and New Jersey with high taxes, low opportunity, or do we want to look like Texas, Florida, or Tennessee where they have low taxes and more opportunities?
Well,
What
we're
do you
heading to
think,
Kansas.
I think we want to look more like Minnesota, frankly, because
Yes,
Minnesota
exactly.
is where they are investing in education, and they know that education is not an expenditure, it's an investment in people, and that's the best economic development thing that we can do as a state.
If that's
When
what
it
they
comes-
want, why are we seeing what we're seeing?
Well, I think when it comes to gas taxes, Minnesota has lower taxes on gasoline and better roads. So in respect to this conversation here about roads, I think you're right.
Yeah, but Gretchen,
They
Well,
dedicate all their
than
road
that.
money to roads, and they don't shortchange education. Education is a huge component of the budget there, and that's why they've got a more educated group of people. That's where the concentration of jobs go,
They're
where
willing
there's
to
that
tax
concentration of
themselves
talent.
for the long-term good. They make long-term investment with their tax dollars, and we do just the opposite.
That's very interesting because we're talking roads. We've been talking roads for a long time, but on December 18th, when they went in session at 10 a.m., by the time they adjourned the next morning, this grew by $700 million. The legislative body is supposed to be a deliberative body. Education may need more money. Mass transit may need more money. But you hold hearings, you identify the problem, you identify certain solutions, people come in and testify. Instead, they went in session in the morning. A day later, with no hearings, they came out with an extra $700 million, an extra $700 million in taxes. It made no sense.
That's
But
almost the way they
irony
did
is
right to work, wasn't
These are
it?
the guys that your group helped get elected and put in charge there.
We
These
don't-
are the people that you have supported and said,
Well, I want to
this
get
is-
back to the
I don't get involved in elections.
I want to get back to the Minnesota model. Why then have Michiganders continually voted more like they want to be like Alabama?
It's a redistricting problem. It really is how we draw our districts. It's very partisan, unlike a lot of other states, where we really should take the politics out and ensure that every vote counts.
Or should
we
the
saw-
Democrats redistrict better when they have the opportunity?
Well, maybe that's the case, but I would prefer that we take the politics out of it, frankly, that districts, we saw in the last election, 49% of the votes cast were for Democratic senators,
But how- I
51
mean,
for
isn't
Republican,
that more
and
of
it's
a pipe-
11 to 20,
Isn't that as much of a
7
pipe
right now.
dream as what Mickey is
The
saying?
courts can step in, and they are stepping in. It just happened in North Carolina this week. I mean, there are limits, and again, we have to hit a threshold where the pain it's so great, the dysfunction is so obvious that something happens, whether it's courts or whether it's voters or whether it's lawsuits.
Kyle, is there anything out there when and if this fails on May 5th that you see the legislature doing?
Well, I don't think there's anything feasible that we've heard right now. But I do believe that the House and the Senate will come up with something. And it may even include a little bit of a revenue increase, but I don't think that a revenue increase of $1.2 billion is coming anytime soon. But I think that they feel it's their responsibility to come up with something. And you know what? It could be another ballot proposal. Maybe it will be something like a straight, maybe a half cent on sales tax, or maybe they look at something else, maybe kind of a different type of gas tax, maybe just the gas tax that the governor's proposing. But I think they would look very foolish if they did nothing.
But this is what drives me crazy. They're not philosophically opposed to the tax, to us taxing ourselves more because they put this on the ballot. They're just opposed to them doing it. It's not that there's some principle involved here. It's just self-preservation. Because we'll pay it if we vote for it. So, it's back to your point. Are we worse off, better off? You can make that case. But it's that they won't do it. That's the just...
You know what I think would be interesting, Burl, is if it wasn't required that we go to the people for a sales tax increase.
Right.
If the legislature had the power to raise the sales tax on itself,
Would they?
Would they have done it? And
Gretchen?
What do you think?
they
I don't
would have
know.
Done it?
I cast those gas tax votes. I would have worked to try to get something like that done, but a sales tax is by nature somewhat more regressive than a gas tax, and I think that's why it was so critical that we have relief in terms of the earned income tax credit and ensure that the schools were shored up. I don't know, but I can tell you that the makeup in the House right now, even though the governor is a Republican and his party controls both chambers and he's got a super majority in one of those chambers, he can't get his own party to solve the problem, and that's why we are at the ballot now
And
asking
that's
the
why he
people to
should
do
be
it.
president. Scott, what would you like to see happen when they go back in session? After this fails, if it does?
Well, I think first, if they're sincere about our lives being at risk, they need to look at the rainy day fund and the $500 million sitting there and put that into some road repair immediately. They have the power to do that this week. They can do that right away. There's a lot of good reforms in here that can be passed simply through taking them up and passing them. They need to look deeper at the Department of Transportation. These 3 recent audits, hopefully they're not the tip of the iceberg, but they raise some really legitimate concerns about how the department is operating. And then they need to look at cuts. Do they really need a new Senate office building? Do we need to have subsidies to Hollywood? Do we have too much corporate welfare? And then after you do those things, they're full-time. So I expect them to take the whole summer, be in session all summer, and really dig down into this problem. And after you do those first 2 things, then maybe you see if there's a small tax increase that might be necessary.
What are the special interest deals you refer to in the name of your organization?
Well, the special interests, I have 4 kids in public schools here in Michigan, and the fact is, a lot of people, when you say special interest, they think it's a negative connotation. The fact is, education is a special interest. Some people think taxpayers are special interest. Mass transit's a special interest. I don't mean that in a negative way. They just are. And they may need more
We're
money.
against them. The name of your organization is Coalition Against Higher Taxes and Special Interest Deals.
We
You're
are
against
special interest deals.
You're
This
against
was a deal. This
education?
was a deal done in the middle of the night. I think, as Bo Schembechler said, that nothing good ever happens after midnight. Like I said earlier,
Or was that 2 a.m.?
like,
Either way.
like I said earlier, they had
See,
no
after 8
hearings.
p.m.
They had no hearings, no deliberation. They went in session at 10 a.m. on December 18th. They adjourned the next morning
Well,
at
we're for
5:30.
getting rid of union membership.
Right?
Well, I think people
Right to
still,
work.
everyone has the right to join a union. I grew up in Inkster, Michigan. My dad
With the
retired from the
process,
union.
right? I mean, you were happy
Right.
with the process.
All right,
that
we've
worked
got to
for
call.
you.
We've got to call a halt to this. I want to thank all of you for being here today. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.